All right, today we're going to look at a single point perspective. That's the idea that things going away from us appear to get smaller as they go back into space. If we have a row of trees running alongside of a road, those little trees are going to look like they get smaller as they go back into space. And that notion kind of explains this idea of single point perspective. When we talk about that single point, what we're referring to is a point off in the distance where our eyes, the furthest our eyes can see, essentially, that meets the horizon line. And essentially, that horizon line is going to be equal with our eye level, essentially, and at a point directly in front of where we can see all of the things that run parallel to us are going to um, kind of point, if you will, to that vanishing point, that single point. And that's why we call it single point perspective. On this example, that single point is right here in the middle. I'm going to draw that if it'll let me. Just right here in the middle. Oh, got it right. Got to draw on a layer that's visible. Again, turn my layers on here. Okay. Where that X meets right there in the middle is where the um, right there. Whoop, whoop. Try it again. Right there. That center point is our vanishing point. In this box, if you will, looking at the inside of a box, if we were to kind of back this up, and I'm going to turn this off and just kind of show you back to the beginning. If we look at how we would see the inside of a box, we would see the front of that box as this blue rectangle. The red lines represent the corners of the box, the top edge where the top meets the sides and where the bottom meets the sides. And if those go back infinitely, if they go back forever, they would eventually would meet in the middle and create where what we're kind of looking at is this red X here that represents where those lines would go if we saw them go all the way back. But we don't see that. What we see is this because the box would have a back on it, and that would stop those lines from going on infinitely. But this would allow us to see the inside of that box in single point perspective. The perspective we would see if we were looking essentially at the center of that box, looking through it through its main opening. And so, understanding how single point perspective works allows us to apply it and see it in other areas and other things. And so, I'm going to look just real quick at a street here, a street view scene, and we're going to turn off a couple layers here and just look at the image itself. Now, as we look at this image, already you can see that there are lines that go back into space. These lines here, whoop, again, let me choose my layer. Okay, all right. So here we can see lines going back into space. Here we can see these lines going back in space. Here we see these lines going back in space. And if we follow those lines going all the way back in space, and first of all, if we look and recognize all the lines that sort of do that vertical going back, all of those are going to point to one particular place far, far in the back, and that's that vanishing point right there in the middle. And so the blue lines I've had to kind of help you see how those lines would go back into space. And so we can recognize how single point perspective truly exists in the world around us and how it really explains how our eyes view the world around us and how we see depth in space. And so, single point perspective is one of the forms of perspective we're going to learn over the next few demos. We're going to need to understand it before we can move on to 2 point perspective. With single point perspective, it's as we are looking straight on, if you will, at the flat um, walls of these buildings, if you will, that would face us. And so, for instance, if you look at the lines I've got going sideways, like this line here, or this line here, these are straight, flat lines that don't represent going back into space because we're looking at the surface of them. With 2 point perspective, we're going to be looking at what happens when we look at the corner of a building and we see those sides of the buildings going back into space in two different directions. Well, then we'll have 2 points of perspective. Once we understand that, we can move to the idea that there's a 3 point perspective where things not only get further going back in each direction, but also as they go up. And so we can't get to any of that until we fully understand how the single point perspective works. So play with it a little bit, do some little box exercises, make lots of little boxes. Um, we'll look at real quick. I'll do one of the best little exercises you can do is to simply draw like 4 boxes. I'm just going to draw these quickly. 1, 2. Now, all 4 of these boxes are facing me, so I know that they're going to be sort of flat as they face me as we understand this single point perspective. All right, so I'm going to say that this is my vanishing point. I'm going to switch colors just real quick so we can. Oh, and I hate having to turn this on its side every time I want to do this. But, all right. So we're going to draw lines from that vanishing point to each of the corners of the boxes. Like so. And so what we understand by doing this is that the boxes that are sort of above our eye level or real close to even with our eye level, we don't see a lot of the bottom of the box. The ones that are below our eye level, we can see some of the top of the box. And we're going to draw these lines going back. All the lines go straight back to the vanishing point. Draw that line there. All right. Then we can go back in and understand where the back sides of these boxes are and how they're going to look in perspective. And understanding how these work, doing these little box exercises is a great way to start understanding how perspective works, single point perspective works. And so, again, the lines that define the sides and the top, they're going to be straight to us because we're looking at that as that flat 90-degree angle as those boxes are looking straight at us. They're not at an angle, they're looking straight at us. Now, this one, we can't really hardly see the bottom of the box. This is almost flat even with our horizon line. This one's only slightly above, so we might get a little bit of it, but we're only really going to be able to see just a little bit of it. Just a little at the bottom. So then we're going to be left with boxes that look sort of like this. I'm just going to draw these blue lines in so we understand what's box and what's imaginary red line that goes back to that point in space. So those are boxes in perspective. What if the boxes were open, right? What if I said, okay, goodness, the inside of these top boxes is open. Well, I'm going to switch color again so we can go back to the lines that we would see, that we wouldn't see, but that represent what's really going on. And let's start with those 2 top boxes. We'll just do the top ones here. So just like we would to those corners that go to the outside, and again, my lines aren't real perfectly straight here, but I'm just kind of freehanding this quickly. Those lines go back into space the same way. And then turning on the side, changing my color again. Right. And then we're going to add where those inside lines would be. Now, I'm going to pretend like this box is transparent and it's made of glass, maybe. We can see all the way through it. And so then we're going to get something that looks a little like this. Okay, and that kind of goes, there we go. There we go. So we would get a box that sort of looks like this if these boxes were transparent, if they were made of glass or if they were just made of wire, we could see through what those corners look like. So that's understanding how to draw things in single point perspective. Play with it a little bit, draw some street scenes. One fun thing to do is to download pictures just like you saw in the first one I showed you, and find where those lines go back, find that vanishing point, and draw those lines back out. Get rid of that layer of the actual photograph and start drawing your own detailing. Start recognizing the tops of the windows, the bottoms of the doors, all point to that vanishing point. All right, that single point perspective. I hope this helps.